Okay, so yeah, lovely, that's great. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So newspapers, I've moved to the BBC, and then worked my way up through radio, television and online, working principally in newsrooms. In radio, I was responsible for the whole of 2 radio stations at different times. And in my career as a journalist, I've felt very strongly that interviewing is at the heart of all the journalism that we do, whether it's original journalism and you're in fact-finding mode where you are coming at it with something that you have an idea about and you're exploring, or if you're just taking part in daily news gathering as a reporter. There's a certain amount that you can do in gathering information that other people send you or reveal to you, but interviewing brings your research alive, and it's the way to clarity as a journalist. So for those of you who managed to make it to the data journalism session last week, which was excellent, even data journalism needs us to verify and check our understanding of what we think we're reading or unravelling. And we do that through questioning and interviews. And our role as journalists is to capture interviews that are insightful and fresh. Obviously, we are informing our audiences, but as soon as your interview becomes a performance between 2 people rather than notes in a notebook, it should also be something that engages your interviewees. So we need to make sure that they're insightful and fresh in the way that we conduct them. So what I'm going to talk about today is the 10 steps, if you like, to great interviewing. We have an hour. It could take a whole week to look at in great detail at the 10 steps to great interviewing. But I drew you a mind map, which actually was a bit mind-blowing, actually. But we'll go through this mind map step by step, so that I can explain to you what I mean in terms of my approach to interviewing. And as I say, I'm coming at this as somebody who has interviewed, I would say, thousands of people during my career as a newspaper reporter, as a radio reporter, as a producer behind the scenes. So I would find and interview people in advance for other journalists and presenters to interview, whose standard of interviews at times went on to win awards. I was a little cog, you might say, but everything that we need to do to conduct great interviews is really important, whether we're just doing something for some private notes, or if we're going to do something that's going to be on TV or the web. So step 1 is fact-finding. Hopefully this isn't a shock to you, but fact-finding, the purpose of your interview, when you have a story in mind and you're going to need to verify or explore or expose information, you need to go through your very basic journalism, your fact-finding, the who, what, where, when and why and how. So your purpose of an interview might just be to get some facts. It might not be an interview that you're filming or recording. It might be notes that you're making in your notebook, in your laptop, in your phone. When you move on to the next purpose of interviewing, it might be that you are wanting to establish some accountability for something that you found out or that you've been told, or you might wish to seek to find out the intention of somebody. That's more about the why and the how. Those questions particularly are the ones that become the interview. And then, of course, we have the profile exploration. There we go. The profile explanation is another of the purposes of interviews. So it could be that we actually find somebody so entertaining or popular or new or different that we want to do an interview with them where they are going to be able to, with our help, be themselves and give an insight into people about what they're like. So those questions are more about the who, the why and the how. Okay. So in terms of preparation, this is really, really key. And as I talk about in some of the classes that we run, in terms of having a story where you will interview people about it, your preparation really can't be slapdash. It has to be very, very thorough. And possibly this mind map makes it look even more difficult than it needs to be. But I just wanted to outline for you the different reasons why you need to prepare and how you would do it. Obviously, you would be thinking about your idea or the knowledge that you have already in a subject matter. You might be doing that preparation by looking at data, interrogating it, something that came to you or something that you went looking for. It could be a story that starts from a press release or something that somebody sent to you where they clearly would like to have some publicity, but to bring it alive, there's going to have to be an interview that takes place. It might be a commission, something in the world of work. It might be a question where someone has said to you, an editor or a producer has said to you, I think you should do an interview with such and such person, or that you've been given the opportunity, an offer of somebody. Quite often you'll find in the world of work that there are lots of people who would be very happy to be interviewed because they're at a point in their work or career or their passion or their politics in society where they need to be interviewed, and they might be choosing you as the reporter. And obviously, in terms of preparation, you need to find who is the best interviewee. So sometimes when you're in the area of an offer by somebody through a press release, they might tell you that somebody is available for interview. And you might find when you do your preparatory interview with that person, the kind of offline interview, the one that isn't recorded, the one that isn't a performance, that they're a terrible speaker. That they really can't get their point across, that they weren't really made for being interviewed in such a way, but they may be the head of the department or the head of the organisation. And sometimes it means that you very deftly have to get facts from them, but suggest that there might be somebody who would be more comfortable to be interviewed. Staying in the realm of press releases, sometimes when that happens, you can work with the press officer. So you as the journalist can work with the press officer to say, I've already had a conversation with this person and they're not going to be the best interviewee in the world. Is there somebody else? Because if they're representing an organisation, they obviously want to have that organisation to be portrayed in the best light. So in terms of the preparation that you're doing for interviews, you're gathering your knowledge together so that even if you didn't get an interview at that stage, you would be able to tell the story. You understand the story. That allows you to start thinking about the research that you really, really need to do to be able to get to the right questions. So it's at this stage before an interview that I would be looking into a subject matter and doing quite a deep dive into it. It could be that I'm looking at past reports and backgrounders on the subject or the interviewee. I could be asking for information up front. So if somebody is taking part in an interview, it could be that as you are talking to them about the subject matter, that you're going to need some extra things. So for example, if you were going to interview the regional director of public health in the northeast of England, you would clearly want to have the most up-to-date information about, if we were talking about coronavirus, you need to have the most up-to-date information, the information that comes from that person. And it would be better to be armed with that information before you start the interview, unless you're in breaking news territory where you really would only be getting that information during the interview. So staying with the research that you're doing so that you can approach the interviewee and agree that an interview will take place. You're doing that dive into subject matter. You're looking at other information, past reports, things that other people have written about that subject matter or the interviewee. You're going and finding data yourself. Other people, other reporters, other sources may give you information. So it could be if you're interviewing somebody, a politician, for example, who is going to talk to you about a new policy, or is going to be accountable to you about an existing policy, you would naturally go to other political spectra and find out what other people are saying about those policies, so that you're armed with different points of view to be able to use in the conduct of your interview. You can look at archives and previous interviews that people have done, and all of this should allow you to identify for sure who is going to be the best interviewee in your story. Now, this sounds really complicated already, and what you'll find as a working journalist is very soon you're doing all of these things pretty much simultaneously. You start to hold in your journalistic brain the purpose for which you're going to conduct the interview. The preparation that you're needing to do starts to blend in with the research and the approach that you're going to make for the interviewee. So although I've separated these out into the 10 steps at the moment, in your working life, there's something that you would be doing pretty much simultaneously, any of those steps at any time when you gain experience. Then it's a matter of the questions. So you've done your research, you know who you're going to interview, and you need to start to prepare your questions. One of the key factors to any kind of successful interview is that you, the journalist, the interviewer, are more prepared than your interviewee. So in a moment, we're going to look at a clip of an interview between Carrie Gracie, who was the BBC's China editor at the time of the interview, 2017, and Carrie Lam, who was about to become the head of Hong Kong. So you can imagine that here, the future head of Hong Kong is going to be very well versed in everything that has gone before her and that will come under her when she's running Hong Kong. So it means that the reporter here, who in this case would be supported by other journalists and producers, and like I talked about before, people who will be helping to source the right questions for the interview. It's really important that this journalist understands and is asking the right kind of questions with the right kind of backup information in her brain, or as you can see here, possibly in her notes, although you don't want to become over burdened by notes when you're conducting the interview, because they can send you off course if you become lost in them. But your questions stem from, going back to the purposes, the reasons why you're conducting the interview. So if you were conducting an interview in breaking news, the latest football match, we're at the end of the match, and you want to know how the football manager viewed the match, you may well be in fact-finding mode. You still should have some questions prepared in your mind at very least, and written down on paper somewhere where you can go to the questions that you would have prepared in advance. If your purpose for the interview is that you're seeking clarity or truth, so that it's going up to these reasons for accountability and intention finding, then you're going to need to make sure that your questions are building in the knowledge that you have and the facts that you've discovered as a journalist. And your questions may sometimes even be statements that you would be making, which might be helpful to the interviewee, they might be challenging to the interviewee, but it's really important that you've prepared these questions in advance. Similarly, when looking for intention, which is what we'll hear in a moment with this interview, you need to have gathered your facts and bring your knowledge to the questions that you're preparing. And lastly, if you were doing an interview where the purpose was to explore the profile of somebody, this character exploration, obviously you're bringing your facts and your knowledge, the research that you've done about the person, but you're also going to bring your humanity to that kind of interview, because the rapport is really important to you, in that, so that they open up and show you their emotion, their character, their personality, their spirituality. Okay, so let's have a look at this interview. So a little bit later, I'll show you the start of the interview for another reason. But here we are. We have Carrie Lamb. She sat down with Carrie Gracie, and Carrie Gracie is about to ask her some questions about the validity of the results of the election. So I'm just going to toggle to a new area to be able to show you this interview. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that I've got YouTube set up, and I'm about to start this clip. Thank you to Ian for letting me know. Okay, so here we go.
Of the People's Republic of China is as robust as ever in many of the respects, and I think this is something to be celebrated.
Here we go.
We'll come back to the question of robust as ever, because it's one on which there are many opinions. But first, there are 7 million people in Hong Kong. 1,200 only get the opportunity to vote, and you won the votes of 777. How can you claim to have a mandate to be a bridge or any other kind of communication between the people of Hong Kong and the central government of Beijing when you only have 777 votes?
Well, I don't think it is a question of a number. The question is about legitimacy. And as you all know, this election committee by itself is formed by a much larger electorate representing broadly all the sectors in society in Hong Kong. So I have pledged that as part of my governance style, I will be engaging all sectors of the community, especially the young people. I'm a very honest and straightforward person. So I will confess that in recent years, there have been that feeling of disconnected, that some people, especially young people, are feeling that they are not connected adequately with the government and with our own country. So this is something that we all need to reflect on. As a government, of course, we need to do more in engaging young people.
Although your votes were in the pro-Beijing and pro-business section, not in the pro-democracy section. And, you know, many mainland voices were raised supporting you. So it's very difficult for you now to escape that charge that you are yet another of Beijing's puppets.
Well, that is a perception. Of course, now that I'm a chief executive and haven't been a politician for 10 years, I know perception is important. But to say that I am just a puppet, I won this election because of pro-Beijing forces, is sort of a failure to acknowledge what I have done in Hong Kong over the last 36 years for the people of Hong Kong.
So, okay, obviously you can watch more of that interview yourself. I'm just going to toggle back to another part, back to the slides again. So bear with me, please. But hopefully what you were able to see there was that Carrie Gracie, the reporter, was really prepared with information about the makeup of the vote and the social profile of the support that was coming to Carrie Lam. So going back to what I'm talking about here, the questions that you're preparing are really, really important, and questions like that which convey information, convey information as well as asking a question are really, really important in your journalistic practice. And of course, hopefully some of you were lucky enough even to hear Carrie Gracie, the reporter, in person when she was in conversation in the Civic Journalism Lab last year. So we'll move on. We will come back to that interview with another clip. But moving on now to purpose and step 5 in the road to really good interviewing. You need to spend some time thinking about what I would call the approach you will take in the interview, and what it would be like to sit in or stand in the shoes or sit in the chair of your interviewee. So one of the things that you need to bear in mind when you're going to interview somebody is what will how will they prepare for the interview? So it's really important that they've agreed to be interviewed by you, but that they understand where the interview is going to go. So in BBC, for example, if you look at the editorial guidelines, you'll find that straight dealing or fair dealing is a really important part of editorial practice, as it will be in many, many organisations, and should be ethically for us as journalists. If we are going to invite somebody to be interviewed on a subject, then they should know what the subject would be, and only in the very rarest of circumstances should we be staging some kind of ambush. Although we do not give question by question in advance to an interviewee what we're going to ask them, we would be able to tell them the broad areas. So if we were arranging that interview with Carrie Lamb in advance, we would be telling her the broad areas that we would want to talk to her about. So her route to become elected as the head of Hong Kong, some scrutiny about the vote, what she wanted for Hong Kong, her relationship to mainland China, all of these things we would be talking to our interviewee about. When I say thinking about wearing their shoes, you need to think about how experienced or trained your interviewee is. If you're working in the world of work, if you're working with people who represent large organisations, whether they be civic or private or commercial organisations, you may find more and more that the most important, if you like, the most that their organisation considers to be the most important, will have had media training. So they are going to be as prepared and clued up for an interview as you are as the interviewee. And therefore you need in your preparation to make sure that you're going to do justice to the conversation that you're going to have. So you need to think about, are they experienced, are they trained in having this interview with you? Sometimes your interviewee may be new or nervous or hostile. I've definitely encountered that many times in my career. Somebody who's never been interviewed before, and they'll be saying to you at the start of the interview, I've never done this before. And you'll need to have a conversation to let them understand what's going to happen. It will be things like how you're going to use your microphone or your camera. You will already, in the agreement to have an interview, have talked about the areas you're going to cover. In their nervousness, they may become a bit tongue-tied, or their voices might be quiet, or they might gulp, they might talk really, really quickly. And so these are things that you need to think about before you're going to conduct the real interview, the one that you're going to record or transmit live in audio or video on social media. You need to think about what's their state of mind going to be. Sometimes you'll be interviewing somebody who has no choice but to be interviewed, but they're going to be hostile because they don't really want to be accountable, or they don't want to reveal their intention, but they're in the position where they are going to have to talk to you. And then you may find that you get through questions really, really quickly because their answers will be very short, sometimes evasive, but usually very short, and they may take you literally at your question. And so the kinds of questions that can help when you're trying to get as full an answer as possible from people, and not just the yes/no answers, the yes/no, hot, cold answers. They need to elicit an explanation for somebody. So I've always found in my journalistic career that two really useful words at the start of a question are tell me. So tell me about this mix-up. If you're talking to somebody who's accounting for some kind of mistake, tell me about your company's performance. Tell me is really important because it's an instruction with a question in, but it's not something that somebody can really say yes or no to. And if they do, it actually puts them in a bit of a worse light. Tell me what went wrong in this situation. That person, it's very difficult for that person to say to you, I'm not going to tell you, because they're having an interview with you. They should tell you. Sometimes you'll be in a scenario where the interviewee has set at least some of the conditions or tried to set some of the conditions, as journalists, we need to resist these as much as possible. It's something ethically and organisationally, if in the world of work, that you will navigate every week, if not every day of the week, where people are saying the time they'll be interviewed, the place they'll be interviewed, the questions that they will or they won't answer, the areas where they don't wish to be interviewed about at all. And you need to make some decisions about how you negotiate on that if you want to do a proper interview. In my experience, the worst kind of interviews are the ones where you give in to every condition of the interviewee and really you just end up as their PR agent, and that's not our job at all. Sometimes when you're thinking about putting yourself in the place of the interviewee, you realise that you have come up with the wrong choice of interviewee, or the person who has been offered to you is the wrong choice. And so there you may need to go back to that person or the organisation that they represent and have a frank conversation, a candid conversation about how actually for the conversation that you want to have, the interview conversation that you want to have, that person isn't necessarily going to have all of the right information. And then it's up to them if they decide that they're going to brief that person or if they're going to find someone else. But it can often be used as a delaying tactic. And again, I would urge you, when you're in this territory, that you are standing up for what you want to achieve in your interview. Okay. So when you're satisfied that you know what the questions are, that you've approached the interviewee and you've got the right one, and the conditions are going to be set. Maybe you've got your interview date. I mean, your interview date might be in half an hour's time. It might be that you're talking to someone on the phone and you're arranging that you're going to come and see them immediately because that's when they're available. But you need to move, at least in your head, if not in your early career, to something actually written and schemed out, to what I would call storyboarding. And that's where you're going to boil down and decide which are your most important questions that you're going to conduct. The issue of, fair dealing, you can't really decide unless you warn your interviewee that you're going to throw in 5 extra questions in a new area that you had never discussed. You'll need to think about what might be your killer questions. And killer questions are just as important for your profile interview as for anything else. Killer questions, what I mean are those questions that elicit some great insight or enlightenment. So they don't necessarily have to be negative things. They might be a question where somebody reveals to you something so wonderful that it ended up being a fantastic question that you asked. You'll be thinking about the structure of the interview. You'll be thinking about, in your storyboarding, you'll be thinking about where are you? Where's it going to happen? If you're filming, is it going to give you the semiotics, the visual indicators that you need that will make sense to people who are watching? Are you going to be able to get some beautiful shots, the wide? This is a wide shot of Emily Maitlis and Prince Andrew. We'll hear a little bit of that interview in a moment. Are you going to be able to get that shot and the other shots that you need? Will there be room for your camera or cameras? Will the lighting be right? What will you do about that? If you were going and you were recording for audio only, you'd need to think again about, are you going to be in an area where your sound will be interfered with or hampered? Where will you be able to record and have some indicative sounds that you can use in an audio mix, so that in the same way that this picture speaks of a palace, that your audio background sound or extra sound that you record, the indicative sound, that you'll be able to have that in the mix. So this is all part of your storyboarding. And then obviously the kit that you're going to take with you, microphones, cameras, might you need to take some lighting, what will be there, may you have to take somebody, another crew member with you if you're going with a couple of cameras. And so your storyboarding is about you having a moment to think about the choreography of your interview and thinking, okay, of all the things I know, I've got so much going on now in my journalistic brain, what are going to be the most important questions, the ones that I really cannot fail to, I must not fail to ask. And so you would have, it would be perfectly natural for these questions to be written down. You can see here, Emily Make This, she has notes. We could see Carrie Gracie, she has notes. The notes are on view. It's really absolutely natural